Caesarea is extremely important. It was built to serve the Romans. And why did Herod the Great build the city for the Romans? One thing you have to understand about Herod the Great. Herod the Great was installed king of Judea because the Romans installed him. He was extremely unliked, that's to say the least. He was paranoid. He was sure that someone always wanted to assassinate him, and he was completely right. The biggest problem with Herod the Great was that he was a non-legal Jew. That is to say, we call it in legal language a bastard. He was not Jewish completely, simply because Judaism says that whoever is born of a Jewish mother is Jewish. If your mother is not Jewish, then you can't be considered Jewish. If your mother is a convert to Judaism, you cannot be considered Jewish. She has to have Jewish blood. In law, we call it jus sanguine, law of blood. Our legal systems are not built upon jus sanguine. It's only the Jewish system that's built upon the law of blood. Hence, you can imagine that every time people sat in the cafeterias, every time people wanted to spend their boredom, the only thing they spoke about was about the bastard king. And he was not happy about that. He had his eyes and ears, and he needed to get rid of anyone who mentioned his lineage, or lack of his lineage, and that created the great problems between Herod the Great and his constituency. He understood that the Romans were the best allies he could ever have, hence he built a lot of projects for the Romans. His love to Rome and Rome's love to him became so great that Rome even did not consider him as a vassal, the king that she has installed, but entitled him the very lucrative and important title of Friend of Rome. What is this Friend of Rome title? The Friend of Rome title says that if a king is considered a friend of Rome, he is not obliged to pay a certain amount of taxes, but gifts are welcomed. That is to say, Herod the Great was not taxed, but he was gifted. And that's a big problem, because you never know how much gifts they want from you. And you will always race to give more gifts. He ended up paying more taxes than he would ever have, but that means that he was not considered as a subordinate, but was considered more or less equal. And that was good news. He builds Caesarea, he dedicates it to Augustus Caesar. If you want to know Augustus Caesar's real name, his real name is Octavian. And he is the nephew of the great Julius Caesar, who was assassinated in Rome. Augustus Caesar visits this place in the year of the Lord 35. Oh no, he doesn't visit the place. Tiberius Caesar visits this place. Tiberius was really crazy. When he visits this place, he lands in one of the ports here, and he is welcomed by another individual, a very famous individual, especially in the Gospel. His name is Pontius Pilate. And when they meet together, there was no photographer at that time, there was a sculptor. Sculptor wrote the name of both people, and the names and oaths were discovered. This is a replica of the stone that bears the name of Tiberius, the great Caesar, who is welcomed by Pontius Pilate, the prefect or the governor of Judea. So now you know that Pontius Pilate lived in this place. If you open the Acts of the Apostles chapter 2, Acts chapter 2, you will find out about a certain follower of Christ, a certain disciple by the name of Philip, who baptized a certain slave down in Jaffa. He came back to Caesarea, and he left from the port of Caesarea. He went to Alexandria, where he became the father of the African church. So now you know about Philip also visiting Caesarea. Who was the first one, folks? Pontius Pilate, who lived in Caesarea. If you open the Acts of the Apostles chapter 10, as we spoke yesterday, you will find about another very important disciple of Jesus, Simon Peter, who came to Caesarea, and he baptized Cornelius. And by the way, Simon Peter also left to Rome. At least that is what the tradition tells us, and he found his death there. So now you know that also Peter visit the place. Go to Acts chapter 16, and go to Acts chapter 22, 23, 24, 25, and you would see that another important disciple, but it is not a disciple of Christ, a follower of Christ, by the name of Paul, was in Caesarea, where he witnessed his great trial. So by now we have 4 individuals that we know very well of that were in Caesarea. Who are they? Pontius Pilate, Philip, Peter, and Paul. Well, I'm sure that after you finish this tour, you'll forget most of the history, if not all of it. But you will not forget that Caesarea is the city of the 4 P's. Very fair, yes? If you're teaching in Sunday school, Caesarea is the city of the 4 P's. Pontius Pilate has only 1 P. So Pontius, Peter, Philip, and Paul. If you want to remember it in a more childish way, in a more easier way, Pontius lived here, Philip traveled from here, Peter converted here, and Paul had his trial. You simple it. Very, very simple. Good. What did Herod the Great build here? Herod the Great built the only and first artificial port at that time. That is something great, because that was the first artificial harbor in the history of humanity. He simply devised, not himself of course, but his architects, devised the way to fill the beds of the earth. How do you do that? They discovered that if you bring volcanic ashes from a famous volcano that has not yet erupted yet, in Naples, Vesuvio, and mix it with limestone and mix it with other materials, it will form strong mortar, and you can fill the earth or the bed of the water with it. And that is how they built the first harbor. Another thing that you would like to remember, if you'd like to remember, that Caesarea is the first city in Israel to introduce a water carrier. How do you say water carrier in Latin? Aqueduct. Aqueductus, which means a water carrier. Believe it or not, until the year 13 before Christ, cities depended on the size of the water system. If the water system was abundant, well, we don't have river in this city, in this country. The only river is the River Jordan, and it's not a river that you can live next to. So if the water system was huge, like the one in Jerusalem, you had a city. If the water system was tiny, like the one in Bethlehem, you had a small city of 120 or 200 people. At Caesarea, there is no water system. Still, there's a city. Why? Because they found out huge and very abundant springs at about 7 miles up to the north, and they brought an aqueduct. They built the aqueduct from that water system, and they brought it here to the city, making sure that the city will expand. After we finish, I will ask Eunice to take us to the aqueduct, and you will see one of the most authentic aqueducts in the world, about 2,100 years old. People die, and Herod the Great died. After he died, the Romans understood that their ally is dead, they cannot depend on any other ally, so they took things in hand, and they controlled Caesarea, and they controlled the whole area, installing a certain individual, and they called him prefect. And Pontius Pilate is a prefect. Prefectus in Latin means a governor. When the message of the gospel started moving from one place to the other, many people converted to Christendom, and many people were offered as baits and offered as sacrifices to the animals in gladiator fighting. And by the way, Caesarea has one of the only arenas where we are sure that Christians were offered to the animals. We'll show you the arena in a while. But not only Christians were offered to animals, Christians also developed systematic theology as we know it now. One very important father of the church by the name of Origen, one more important father of the church by the name of Eusebius of Caesarea, and those were not, by the way, theologians of the Baptist Church or the Catholic Church. This is the universal church that unites us together, developed in here. Actually, there was a school of theology called the School of Caesarea. Until the 6th century, nearly every Christian bishop nearly every Christian priest or monk studied in Caesarea and went to evangelize the world. We can clearly and easily call Caesarea as the springboard of evangelization. Unfortunately, the books do not speak about that. They only speak about Herod the Great, the Hippodrome, and maybe a little bit about Paul. But no one mentioned that Caesarea is far more important than any Rome, than any Jerusalem, and than any Antioch or Alexandria as far as Christian faith is concerned, especially to us Westerns. If you're a follower of the Eastern churches, they have other centers. But this is the development of the Western theology as we know it, and if it hadn't been for Caesarea, we would not have seen the same development. It would have developed, but not in the same sense. Caesarea was wiped out by the Muslims. The Muslims arrived to town and they exercised their favorite sport, destroying cities, converting churches into mosques, or converting people, and if you're not converted, you're killed. During a little bit of time, Caesarea was controlled by the Crusades. Have you heard about the Crusaders? Yes. Lovely. You are going to see a Crusader city now. One of the only remaining Crusader cities in the world is in Caesarea. So that's why we're going to walk in a while. We're going to walk from the Roman part to the Crusader part. You're going to see some Crusader ruins built by a certain Louis IX, who is French, as you can understand from his name. He built huge fortifications. The man spent, listen very well, 4.5 years building the fortifications. The Muslims took the city in 1.5 hours. Yes. Only a French man would do 4.5 years of fortifications. The city would fall in about 1.5 hours. But I will tell you how the city fell in 1.5 hours. Because the way he thought in French. They thought in Arabic. And I think we should understand this today. We cannot impose on people what we think is right. He thought that they have to attack us according to our way. If they attack us according to our way, they need about 10 years to take the city. Well, he was extremely wrong. They attacked according to their ways. And it took around 1.5 hours because what he fortified, he built great moats of water. Hollywood will fill it with water and with crocodiles. You're going to see them. Folks, no water and no crocodiles. But he built the whole thing thinking he's in France or in England. And he says, all right, if they cover, you're going to have a problem crossing that place. Well, it took around the problem about 50 minutes to think about that and about 20 minutes to implement it in the whole city. Well, the taking of Caesarea has to be taught in every school of military and military strategy, because this was simply a fall of all the Western mentality towards a very small few that simply could outsmart us. And I'll tell you about that later. All right. I hope I didn't bore you. You will forget a lot of the